There we go. Okay, so welcome everybody. We're going to I want to give an outline of how I want to do it today because we really have two sugyot, maybe two and a half, two. Let's call it two. One, which is going to challenge. It'll be interesting what it challenges, but challenging either Shmuel or Rav Yehuda that we learned last time based on our Mishnah, and another one based on a bright that was actually from the Tosefta, which we learned in the very first class that we had this year. And so I will split it up. But the way I want to do it is I want to do the challenge from the Mishnah, and then I want to look at the Tosfot, the Tosfot on that, and then we'll go on to the next sugya about the Chamor and the Gamal, and then we'll look at the Tosfot, and then we'll look at some of the later halachic sources as well, God willing, if we get the chance. So, all right, so let's just to remind like where we are, where we're sitting, as somebody can jump in, right? Last time we had this whole thing that Shmuel had said two things one about Rachuv and one about Manhig to his student Rav Yehuda. Rav Yehuda couldn't remember, trying to tell it to his student Rav Yosef, but or maybe Rav Yosef couldn't remember, telling to his student Abaye. It's very confusing who remembers what, but what was the conclusion that we had at that point? Or what conclusions can we say we drew at this point? Well, first off, Rachuv and Manhig, what case are we talking about?
I mean, going back to the original question that we talked about with, two people who are plowing during Shemitah, it's during on Shabbat, right?
No, it's they're plowing with a shore and a chamor together.
I'm sorry, the chamor,
right.
Right. So the one who's driving the two of them, whether it's not clear whether on top of them or with a stick in front of them, he gets malkot, and the person who's sort of riding on the plow behind gets nothing, or maybe he doesn't get nothing, depending on whether you're a mimei or the chachamim, and which side of that ibcha you take.
Beautiful. Okay, so and we're gonna assume throughout this that the ibcha of Shmuel holds at this point, because we're really challenging Shmuel, or at least the understanding of Shmuel. So we're gonna have to hold that. So right, the chachamim say that the person who's yoshev bekaron is patur. Right, Rabbi Meir says he's chayav. And therefore, we learn from that idea, what do we learn about Rachuv?
That it's not really counted as anything. It's it's an active passive distinction.
Good. Rachuv is lakane, right? It doesn't acquire afilu lechude, even by itself, right? That's going to be our conclusion up until now as to what Shmuel has taught. So, okay. And just to remind us too, manhig, right? What did manhig mean? We did this with Rav Nachum a couple of weeks ago, looking at the Mishnah and then the Gemara in Kiddushin, right? What are some examples of manhig? Probably not what you can see behind me, so necessarily. Maybe
like driving an animal from behind, or
exactly.
I mean, right, or potentially pulling it from the front, but like causing it to move through some sort of applied force,
as opposed to just calling for it and making it move by enticing it.
That also works. That's the other one. Kara, right? V'ratzav lefanav, right? Is the other one. Karala v'ratzav lefanav, and the other one is I think it's a hikisha ba or something like that, right? That you give it a little hit with either with a switch or something like that, and it goes. Okay, good. So now we are on Chet Amud Bet. We're I'd probably say 3/4 away down the page. Meitive. So someone want to read? Go for it, Michael.
Okay. Meitive. Hayu shnaim rochavin al gabe behema v'chulei. Mani. Ilema Rebbe Meir, Pashta Yoshev Kane, Rachuv Mibai, Ella.
You can keep going. That's good.
Ella Lav Rabbanan, Ushmamina Rachuv Kane. Right. So we're going to raise an objection to this understanding, going back to our Mishnah, right, where you have two people who are, both both riding on an animal. In accordance with whose opinion is this? If we say that it's Rebbe Meir, like that would then mean that one who is Yoshev can acquire, or
Well, not that would mean. He says that.
no,
He says that
we
straight out.
have, right, we have him saying that a Yoshev can acquire an animal.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, interestingly enough, or at least we imply that from his statement about Kilayim. So,
and from and again, like from the flip of it that we did.
Exactly, from the Apich Shmuel. So.
Right. Rachuv mibai, right? So would we need to then say this regarding a rachuv? Like this should be obvious.
Exactly.
Right. Rather, it must be that we are right. Like rather, isn't it that we're talking about the statement of Rabbanan, and we learn from this that one who is riding can acquire the animal.
Good. So, right, that seems to be the Mishnah, right? Because why in the Mishnah? Well, let me ask you this: how in the Mishnah do you learn that Rachuv is Kane?
Because if we have a case, right, like the very first case of the Mishnah is Shnaim Rochvin, and then it gets into like Echad, right? Then it differentiates. I forget the exact wording. Right, Echad Rochev Echad Manhig. Right, so we've been focusing on the case of Echad Rachuv Echad Manhig to try to figure out how we would differentiate between those two forms of acquisition. But in this case, right, it's the same form of acquisition.
Well, we haven't said that yet, right? We haven't said it's the same form. We say that they equally split the animal, though, at this point, right? This is
well, wait a second. Are we talking? It's an important point to clarify.
Yeah.
Are we talking when we're quoting the Mishnah, which part of the Mishnah are we bringing our objection from? The part that we see printed in front of us in the Gemara, or the part that says the Hule?
Yes. So that is for sure. Well, let's go back. We should go back to the Mishnah. Everyone go back to Bet Amud Aleph. So
that's a point of clarification just to think about.
Yeah. So all right. If you go to Bet Amud Aleph, sorry, I'm in the right. Go ahead, Michael. Read from Hayu Shnaim Rochavin al Gabe Behema.
Hayu Shnaim Rochavin al Gabe Behema, O Shaya Echad Rochev Echad Manhig. זה אומר כולה שלי וזה אומר כולה שלי, זה יישבע שאין לו בה פחות מחציה, וזה יישבע שאין לו בה פחות מחציה, ויחלוקו. בזמן שהמודים או ש...
I don't care about the end right now. I mean, I care about the end, but not at the moment. It's so go ahead, explain.
So if you have a case where there are two people who are both riding on an animal, or where one of them is riding and the other one is driving it, and each one claims that they have possession of the entire animal, they each take an oath that they don't have a right to less than half of it, and they split it.
Exactly. So what does that tell us about Rachuv? Maybe even think about this in a Tosfot way, right? What does Tosfot say about Chazaka and Kinyan? If we go back, that's probably a good way to look at it. We're going to reread that.
I think it said it's not the same last week.
They're not the same, but one thing implies the other, right? In order to get a chazaka, what do you have to be able to have chazaka when there's two people there? What do you have to be able to say about the single person case?
You have to be able to say that they could be makni in order to, because when you have the competition, that's where you have the
exactly. If an action X counts as a chazaka when somebody else is doing another action that's either the same or different, then it must be that X alone is koneh, right? That is the mathematics of the Tosfot, right? So
this is the part with whether someone's milchzak or not.
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
But even if you don't do the Tosfot, you just say, well, the reason in the Mishnah you're yachloku is because you're koneh, right? Either way, it implies that Rachuv is koneh, right? That seems to be a problem.
Even in a case where there's a manhig.
Exactly. It's as good a kinyan as manhig, right? It's not even that it's like by itself, it's a question. It's like it's only a question of manhig, and that's not even a question. There the Mishnah answers it and says that the two of them split it. So But by the way, I mean, I think, I don't know about you guys, but the first time I ever learned the sugya, it drove me, not this sugya, the sugya before, it drove me nuts. I was like, they're trying to determine what Shmuel said. What about the Mishnah? Right? The Mishnah, it's like right there. It's like, sounds like Manhig and Rachuv are both good kinyanim. Right? What are we worrying about? You know? So. And in fact, right, so, but now the question is, so who's being challenged here in this Metiveh? Right, because this is actually, it's an interesting question because there's different possibilities, right? Who could we possibly be challenging?
Can I go back one step, Joel?
Yeah, of course, Sarah, go for it.
Is it the case that, like, couldn't we say that in the Mishnah? It's not because they're both kona it, really. It's
Mhm.
just that we kind of don't have a better situation than Yachloku. So that's what we do because of some safek, right? We sort of went in that direction, I don't know, last week, the week before. But like, why does it have to be that the only way that we get to the din of Yachloku in the Mishnah is to say that both of these things effectuate a kinyan?
Good. So, you know, it's an interesting question. I think the Tosfot are kind of dealing with that, right? They start to go away from kinyan, but they
Yeah.
can't get away from it because you have
But they
to.
can't go all the way.
Yeah, partially
seems
because of the previous sugya. You have to, but you know, you could say that this is just the state that they are in right now, and this is, you know, the extreme version of chazaka, right? If two people show up in court like this, we don't know the history of how they acquired it. All we know is that this is how they are right now, and both of those are ways that people would recognize the owner of the animal, not a way of recognizing not a way of doing kinyan, and those could be different things. But good, Aaron.
There, I guess, there are two ways of reading the Metiveh.
Mhm.
The first, I think the obvious one would be it's a Metiveh, maybe a Metiveh on Shmuel.
Yeah,
Shmuel says chad kaneh, chad lo kaneh. The Mishnah, and we infer from that this is what Shmuel has to mean, and we know that we now know from the Mishnah that Rachuv is kaneh. You could also interpret as a Metiveh on the idea that what Shmuel means is Rachuv lo kaneh and Manhig is kaneh, but that wouldn't make so much sense because the Mishnah also seems to imply that Manhig is also kaneh.
good. There's a third choice, actually, and this isn't about Shmuel at all, right? Which is maybe, Aaron, actually, I know you, I'm sure you're like a little tired right now, but do you want to read a Rashi for us?
Sure.
Good. Everyone look at the Rashi where he says, Ela lav Rabbanan.
Elav Rabbanan. Vashmuinan de biyoshev hu de patur. Aval Rachuv lo. Betiyuv de Rav Yehuda. De pshat rochev mioshev. Miushav.
Mioshev, yeah. So,
Not Miushav.
no, it's may quote unquote Yoshev.
Oh,
right?
May Yoshev, right.
Yeah.
So this comes to teach us that in a case of Yoshev, when he's patur, but Rachuv is not. And this is a challenge. This is a pushback against Rav Yehuda, who tries to draw out Rochev from Yoshev.
Exactly, right? Because Rochev at least has enough power to match Manhig, which means that it's not nothing, right? It's not sitting, did I say Yoshev? Sorry, Rachuv has enough power to match Manhig from our Mishnah. So it's not nothing, and therefore it can't be where the Rabbanan, clearly from the Mishnah and Kilayim, think that Yoshev is nothing. And therefore those two don't work in the world together, right? At this point. So it really doesn't necessarily challenge. Shmuel may have an answer, right? It might be that, like Sarah says, maybe Rachuv in the Mishnah doesn't tell us anything about kinyan, right? But at least it has it. You can't claim that it's automatic that it comes from Yoshev. Right? Should I say that again? Is that right?
Repeat. What did we do last week? What did we prove last week?
Yeah.
From Kilayim.
Good. Yeah, so that's a great point, Rav. Thank you, Rav Nachum. I was afraid you weren't going to be here today, so it's a good thing you're here. This is it's but no,
I thought I put more pressure on you if I'm here.
It's good. I need the pressure. So it's last week we proved from the Mishnah and Kilayim where the Chachamim say that Yoshev is patur from Kilayim. You're sitting in a wagon being pulled by a chamor and a shore who are yoked together. No chiyuv and no obligation. You're not chayav in Kilayim at that point, right? And from there, Rav Yehuda said, oh, and the fact that Shmuel, right, had a thing to say about who said what in this Mishnah is proof that Shmuel thinks that the halacha follows that Yoshev is patur. And from Yoshev, we can derive Rachuv, and we're like, well, wait a second, Rachuv is a little different than Yoshev. We're like, nah, the differences are they're nothing. They're Nerishkeit, right? And here we're like, well, wait a second, the Mishnah doesn't seem to think that Rachuv is as weak as Yoshev, right? Because when Rachuv goes up against Manhig, it doesn't have the same effect necessarily as it does when it goes up against, as when Yoshev goes up against Manhig. And therefore, we can't draw one from the other. Right, just as Aaron beautifully said, I like that that pashat, that instead of derive, like to draw out one from the other, right, is really nice there. So we're stuck, right? We're stuck. The Mishnah seems to destroy Rav Yehuda's entire argument to discover what Shmuel said. But we have an answer. Thankfully, of course, we have an answer. It's the Gemara. We got to answer. Well, that doesn't always have an answer. It has an answer to this question. But I say, so I want to pause. Are people following this so far? It's a very subtle point here of like, and this is a problem. Sometimes you get a metive and you're like, well, actually, what's being challenged? But
now, why isn't it from the first part, the actual text in front of us, and why is it from the v'chule that the kasha is drawn?
Oh, why is it stronger from there, or why is it because it's stronger from there because in the Mishnah, the Mishnah Kilayim, they put up Yoshev against Manhig, and therefore we're looking for Rahuv against Manhig to see how the two of them match up to each other. So, but what why they printed in our Gemara Hayushnaim Rochavim, I don't know. That's a printed.
Yeah, no, I'm just saying why. Why do you prefer to say that? I also prefer to say that. I'm just curious what you're. Yeah.
Do you have a different reason, Rav Nachum?
No.
So
I'm just wondering, could it have been learned from the first part of the Mishnah, or is it impossible?
Yeah, I mean, you could, and this I think would, Sarah, maybe this will bother you more, right? We'd say, well, the fact that Shnaim Rochavim implies that we split it. Why don't we just say, well, neither of you own it, and just it's still hefker. But that would imply that we'd have to be that our Mishnah is talking about what happens in our Mishnah is a kinyan and not just a court decision. So. But, okay. I do want to press on a little bit. So I know it's a little confusing, and this is and we're doing this right after Purim. So but the Gemara has an answer. Maybe Michael, you want to read a little bit more?
Yeah. B'manhig beraglav. All right, so what's the case that we're talking about? One who is guiding the animal with their legs.
Good. So this might have also shocked people earlier, right? When we were talking about Rachuv, maybe the first time you were reading through it, like Rachuv, I don't understand, why is Rachuv not manhig, right? Rachuv is when you're riding, if I say I'm riding a horse, I don't mean I'm just sitting on the horse. I mean I'm like kicking the horse and making it go, right? It's
didn't we just say last week that Reglav doesn't work for the purposes of Kenyan?
Tosfot said that when you say tofes, right, tofespa, right, the rachuv is a deep because it's tofespa. Tosfot said, don't think that tofespa means with your legs. That means the mosera.
Right, but so this is a different idea of tofespa beraglav as opposed to manyik beraglav.
Exactly. Yeah, okay. Tofes beraglav means I'm just holding on with my legs for dear life, which I've been horseback riding and I've done a little bit of both, right? So you can hold on, and then you can also be a good rider who knows how to make the animal go with your legs.
Right? They do that at fairs all the time. You'll put your 3-year-old or 4-year-old up on a horse, and someone will lead the horse around. But would say that you're as a 4-year-old, you're acquiring the horse. You're right. You're sitting on the horse, and the horse may or may not even know you're there.
Yeah, not even just acquiring. No one would say my child is driving the horse, right? They would say my child is like going for a ride, which there's a very subtle difference there, but in the language.
Right, but up till now, we've been assuming that the rider is not using his legs.
Exactly.
And now and to drive the horse, and now we're introducing that.
Mm-hmm. And this distinguishes it completely from Yoshev Bekaram. Right, at this point, this is not a case that's even completely clearly. Rav Yehuda wasn't talking about this because this is a case of someone who's actually doing something active to make the horse go at this point. So, But this, by the way, is great to have after Purim, right? This is because actually, when Haman is leading that horse around town with Mordechai on the back of it, right? He's not driving the horse. That's the whole thing. He's like a king, right? We'll get that actually on I think it's on Ted Amud Bet, right? The like who rides horses in town or not, and there's a way of can be both a lowly state and a high state to be driven around town on a horse, essentially. But okay, good. But now we've got a problem, right? Because if Rachuv in the Mishnah means manhig baraglav, ihachi, go ahead, keep going, Michael.
Ihachi hainu manhig, right? But then what's the difference between this manhig baraglav, who we think is the rochev, and the manhig who was explicitly listed separately?
Exactly.
Tre gavne manhig.
Mhm.
There are two different types. There are two different manners of what it means to lead or to kind of propel the animal.
Yeah, there's like subcategories of manhig, right? Maybe one is a switch, one is with riding. Of course,
Depends.
yeah, go ahead. Go ahead, Alan. Go for it.
No, sorry, bad joke. So, that's it.
Well, no, but I think it's important. Like you might ask, and this will come up later into some extent of like, well, wait a second, there's like more than two types. We already knew two types of money, right? One is to hit it, one is to call it, right? Why do we need Rachuv to be particularly called out, which is going to be the Gemara's question. So
Ma'odetema Rachuv adif de hamanhig b'tafisba kamash malan. Right, lest you would say that Rachuv is a preferable form of acquisition because the Rachuv is both, leading the animal and grabbing it. This teaches us that it is not, in fact, a preferable form.
Exactly, it's
of acquisition.
Yeah, it's an equal form. So
yeah,
or somewhat equal. It's right, good, right? So what would have happened? Let's pretend now, for instance, if the Mishnah had just said, right, Shnaim manhigim bebehema, right? Zeomer, Shalihu, Vizomer Shalihu, and or Shalihi, and Beachloku. What would we say is the case for Rachuv? If one is Rachuv and one is, this is in the Havamina, not in the final conclusion of the Mishnah.
Right. I mean, I feel like then we would say, well, then the Rachuv has an even better claim because not only are they manhig, but they have, a physical hold on the animal itself, consistent, right? As opposed to calling, as opposed to hitting from behind, they actually maintain physical hold throughout the experience.
Exactly. Aaron, go ahead.
Right. The problem now is that given that a Rachuv can be a manhig when we have two Rachuv, then you should say, well, why would you split it? It should go to the Rachuv who's manhig, and we know that they can't both be manhig because then the animal wouldn't be moving.
Sorry, say that one more time. So you saying
now that we know a Rachuv is also a manhig.
Yeah. Or there is a type of Rachuv that is a manhig. There's two types of Rachuv now. Yeah, but go ahead. So
if there are Shnaim Rochvin, then one of them, unless there's also a manhig, if it's just Shnaim Rochvin, one of the Rochvin must be also a manhig. And why would you split it? It should be the Rachuv who is also manhig.
Good. Does anyone I have an assumption about this, but does anyone else have an answer?
I'm sorry, I need to roll that back and play the tape from about 15 seconds in arrears here.
Aaron, can I restate your question and see if I said it right and then right? Aaron's saying if the Shnaim Rochvim, right? If an animal's coming into court and two people are on its back and it's coming in a straight line, right? Clearly one of them is Rochev Vemanhig Umanhig Baraglav, and one of them is just Yoshev, right? So how come we're saying Yachloku? Did I say that right, Aaron?
And you can't say that they're just sitting.
Yes.
They're both just sitting there. You can't say that because then it would be very strange because we're comparing bring it to the next part of the Mishnah. The Mishnah is saying two people riding, is they divided, and also one person riding and one person manhig.
Exactly.
So if the second case is talking about where he's manhig and riding, so the first case is probably where he's manhig and riding. So, I mean, I think the simple one answer is somehow they're both manhig with their feet.
Yeah.
One with the left foot and one with the right foot, or I don't know.
One does left turns, one does right turns. You know, it's
So it's like rowing a boat, right? Like something, and I'm not about riding to say whether this is accurate, but
Or like a canoe. In a canoe, you got the guy on the right and the guy on the left.
Go for it, Aaron.
One possibility would be to a possibility that would itself carry an objection would be to just use the end of this passage as we've gotten up to it and say, well, actually the rochev or the rachuv who is manhig is not a rachuv, he's actually a manhig, and therefore it does make sense to split. But then it becomes just the same scenario as then it actually is not a separate scenario from rachuv and manhig.
Yeah, it's the same thing essentially at that point. It's they're just, you might think because they're in different situations, right? That the two manhigim or one rachuv manhigim look a little bit different, but they're all the same. So yeah, it could also be that it's, I imagine just imagine the talit in particular, right? Two people are pulling on this talit and they get it to court. I imagine that didn't make it in a straight line either, right? That it's actually a pretty much like they're jostling the whole way. Here, like they want to get to court, but they're fighting over who's guiding the horse into court, kind of thing. They're both kicking it, one's making it go faster, one's making it go slower, one's making it turn. It's like, no, that you got to turn more left to get to the doorway, it's whatever it may be. So it's maybe a little bit of a kind of like a drunkard's walk, if people have ever done the drunkard's walk problem, in a famous statistical mechanics problem.
Brownian motion, as it were.
Yeah.
So the question though is like the Mishnah is saying rochvim. So, but we're here we're saying, but that doesn't do anything. The rochev isn't actually kane. So are we going to come around and say, oh, well, because the Mishnah was exact, if two people are rochev, it's because we can't act, and the reason why we're saying split it is because neither one of them actually fully acquired the animals. Like if one of them had been doing hanhaga or one of them had been doing mishicha, there would have been a clear case of somebody actually acquiring something. But here we dafka don't say this, and we've been arguing over this round and round and round.
I think it's I think Josie, I think the entire Mishnah is rochev umanhig beraglav, right? That when the Mishnah uses the word rochev, it means rochev umanhig beraglav. When Shmuel, or at least Rav Yehuda's understanding of Shmuel, uses rochev or rachuv, it means sitting. It's like yoshev, and also maybe tofes b'mosera, but not doing anything to make the animal go, or at least not go a lot, right? These are all very right. We already saw that distinction in the Tosfot too, right? Where maybe you sit on it and it makes it move a little bit, but not that you're actually actually driving the animal. So maybe actually it's like good. I just want to talk about, right? So we have like three kind of categories. We have yoshev, which is you sit in it, and maybe that Tosfot even implied that yoshev bekaron maybe makes the animal move a little bit, right? You've added some weight, and maybe it reacts to that. But yoshev isn't holding anything, right? You have rochev, part one, which is they are holding something. Maybe you make the animal take a step or two, but you're not really driving the animal, right? You have rochev 3, which you're holding something and you're actually like digging your legs into the animals with, and you're making the animal go. And then you have manhig, which you're not holding anything on the animal, but you're making it go, right? And those are kind of the 4 different categories we have of interacting with the animal so far. And yoshev, we decided definitely is not koneh, except, well, to Rebbe Meir it's koneh, but not to Rabbanan. Rochev, and when passive, rochev 1 is not koneh, right, according to Rabbanan. Rochev 2 is koneh, and manhig is koneh, and you might have thought rochev 2 was better than manhig, but don't think that, because the Mishnah proves it's not. And that's where we end up at this point.
The Mishnah is definitely talking about a person who's driving the horse while he's riding it.
Exactly.
As opposed to the case that we were originally discussing of
Shmuel.
That was the theoretical case of Shmuel, who was talking about a person who's rochev.
Yeah.
Therefore, they're 2 different cases, and our Mishnah doesn't speak to our other case.
Exactly. So, because at the end of the day, it wouldn't get off the ground in our Mishnah. If one person was passively sitting on the horse, that person would not be part of the Yachloku strategy at that point. So, okay. We've got a Tosfot. Wait, any questions up until now? And then the Tosfot. So, all right. This is the last Tosfot on the Amud Mahu Detema Rahuv Adif. So well, let's go through it. But Tosfot's they're gonna do some interesting things here. So at least I think so. I don't know. Jacob, do you want to read Tosfot?
Yeah, I can read. So Ma'od Tema Adif.
Yeah. Remind us where we are in the flow of the Gemara that this line comes up.
I mean, it's at the end of this Metzia Sugya, and this is suggesting like what you might think to say, and then we're saying Mashbalan as the Mishnah teaches us that this isn't actually the case.
In other words, why did the
Right,
Mishnah? You go for it, Alan, please. Yeah.
I'm just saying this out because as many times
Yeah.
as possible because it is confusing.
Yeah.
At this point in the Gemara, we learned that when the Mishnah says Rochev, it really is referring to someone who's Rochev Manhig. Okay, in that case, both Echad Rochev and Echad Manhig, we're really talking about two things that are identical. They're both Manhig. Why does the Mishnah need to say both of them, and then the Gemara comes along with this method?
Exactly. Why does the Mishnah say Shnaim Manhigim Behema, right?
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, Jacob, go
So
for it.
Hirosh Chazkato Adif Vivatel Chazkat Hamanhig. Mas Milan Jistam Musakim Beachloku.
But stop there for a second.
Yeah. So yeah. Explains
Or
the-
like colon explanation, right?
yeah. So his chazaka, the chazaka of the Rachuv is better, and he would invalidate the chazaka of the Manhig.
Mhm.
So the Mishnah, including both of these, in the Echad Rachuv Echad Manhig case, comes teach us that both of them have a valid chazaka, and they divide it.
Exactly. Right, this is
Well,
Tosfot.
Sorry,
Okay, go for it,
Sorry.
Alan.
sorry, Joe, can I ask a clarifying question?
Yeah.
Remind me why this is even someone who's manhig is only mufsak and is not makna.
No, it's not that they're only muksak and not makna. Tosfot said that the Mishnah is dealing with the case of chazaka. It's not dealing with the case of koneh. And I should remind you of the mathematics here, right? According to Tosfot, if you are koneh lechud, right, when you're by yourself and your action is koneh, then if two people show up with two different actions and both of them are koneh by themselves, then together each of them is muhsak, but not necessarily koneh, because the Mishnah is interested in chazaka. It's not interested in kinyan. But to be able to have a chazaka, you have to do an action where if you were alone, it would be koneh. All right. And Tosfot's going to stick to their guns here. And this is going to be important. It's going to cause them trouble, but they're going to stick to their guns.
Okay, thanks for spelling it out once more.
That was, by the way, the Tosfot Odilma Manhigadif Vechule, right? So, okay.
Aval in our isma hudetema durchob adif levitel kinyan hamat nihig.
I want you to go back, Jacob, and I want you to emphasize the word kinyan there. Do that again.
Okay, aval in the farish mahudetema durchob adif levitel kinyan hamat nihig. Kamas man the same kanu could appreciate leel. Dafilu the kind of makom rachuv mikre mufsak. Kevan demanhig luchude kane.
Right.
So, but there isn't but we don't need to explain.
Not need you. Don't explain it this way, right? This is like,
Okay, don't explain the Ma'odetema that Rechov is better and it mevatels the acquisition of the Manhig.
mhm.
Then that would come teach us that both of them acquire. And this is as we explained earlier
That
that
this
even if
can't be,
they
yeah.
what?
Because as Tosfos said, as I explained earlier, this can't be the case because, or not because,
Ah.
therefore, kind of.
Yeah. Because even in a place where there isn't Kenyan in the place where there's riding, we call that musak, since manhig by itself acquires.
Exactly. In other words, don't think the Mishnah solves the question or doesn't solve to some extent of, Rochev and Manhig together, which one is Koneh. The Mishnah is not about Koneh. It's not coming to teach us that both of them are Koneh. It's coming to teach us both of them are Muhzak. It's never not solving a question about are they both Koneh in the place of the other. Like in other words, if someone's riding and someone's Manhig, are they both Koneh? Is one Koneh? Is one not? The Mishnah is not dealing with that question. It's dealing with the Chazaka question. Right?
No, because that was our no, so we had a question from before. Our question was, does manhig koneh become rochev? Does rochev koneh become manhig? And if we had that question, then kind of it must be that our Mishnah doesn't answer that question.
Exactly.
Because if our Mishnah answered that question, then we just would use our Mishnah and we'd be done. So our Mishnah is not proving anything about whether it's koneh, it's just proving that there's hazaka in such a case. Exactly. And we're really still in our question. Hey, fellas, do these two forms of kinyan work when there's simultaneous, another form of kinyan going on?
Exactly. So, but because remember, Tosfot said, right, if this was a proof about kinyan, maybe maybe we'll go back and take a look at that in a little bit. But right, Tosfot, if the Mishnah is proof about kinyan, then we'd say, well, wait a second, if you have manhig and you have rochev and manhig beraglav are both koneh, right? When they both happen simultaneously, then for sure rochev that's just yoshev doesn't koneh, and then we'd be able to answer the question of the original question of Shmuel from our Mishnah, exactly like Rav Nachum said. So that can't be the case. But this is a little bit, I don't know about you guys, I find it a little bit confusing. I have to read it a couple times. But maybe I'll try to repeat things, 40 times so we can learn them. Like learning that you can't have a Purim student at night, or you can have a Purim student, it doesn't count. Right. But in fact, the Ramah says to have a Purim student at night, just it doesn't count for your chiyuv. Anyway, sorry, that tangent. But the Tosfot says if our Mishnah was about kinyan, then you would say the following logic. You'd say, well, wait a second. If you are one person's manhig and one person is rochevu manhig, and in that case they're yachloku, then manhig is as good as rochevu manhig. Well, then if you have the case of rochev ve'eno manhig, right, then for sure manhig is better. And then for sure Shmuel's question gets answered from our Mishnah. So therefore our Mishnah can't be about kinyan. So it must be about chazaka. And chazaka is related to kinyan when you're by yourself, but it's not related to kinyan when you're with somebody else, right? So that's the entire logic of that Tosfot. And that's why they're sticking to their guns here, and very strongly. Hopefully that's making a little more sense. If not, maybe by the end of all this, it will start.
But just let me add one more point, which is, I think, interesting, which is that this kind of explains why we don't ask them ever, well, how did you acquire this thing? In other words, we're never entertaining that question. Oh, well, how did you acquire that thing? Why didn't the Mishnah say, well, what was your method of kinyan? We're just a baked in, and we're just seeing things in front of us, and we're saying, well, we don't care what you say. We're just going to judge the Metziut as we see it.
Yeah, it's interesting because at the end of that other Tosfot we looked at, right? He gets into the question of, well, what about when they're both modim, they're yachloku? Why isn't that about kinyan? And they're like, no. What their modim is that they both did kinyan together with the same type of kinyan, right? It's so there we're asking when they're moded, we ask the history. It seems to be.
Well, they're volunteering.
Yes, yeah.
Maybe then they're volunteering. We were moded that we were both acquired at the same time. Oh, okay. So then what's the question? Here, right. Okay. So, I mean, I'm just thinking of the Shulchan Aruch in Yeridea, where it talks about does the Beit Din have to lachkor? Was there more water in the in the pot when you're coming, you want to know if there's 60. Was there more water in the pot before?
Oh, that's
or
right.
wasn't there? And the Ramah says, I never saw anybody, interrogating the people. They just judge the pot on what they see in front of them.
So I like that connection. That's I mean, this is the whole thing we're dealing with here, right? Is I think all the cases have been really a thing of the Beit Din doesn't know the history. People make claims about the history, they could whatever, but the Beit Din is all they have to go on is anasahade, what's in front of them. And so they're going not on the history, but on what they see at the moment. Sarah, go for it.
But isn't it like the thing that they see is relevant and like creates a hazaka precisely because it's the kind of thing that would allow them to be kona the animal from hefker.
That's the Ritva's attack on Tosfot.
Yeah.
Right? Like, doesn't that
Yeah.
seem like the argument? I don't know. Yeah, I mean,
Yes.
maybe we're just going over the same
No, I think that's
Yeah.
why.
we went through last week, right? But it just seems like important to kind of say that out
Yeah.
here too. I don't know.
So, I mean, I think that is, as Rav Nachman put it, that's why not everyone likes the Tosfot here. It's actually it's a little bit of a dahuk reading to be able to say this. At the same time, though, I think the Tosfot might say, right, that then you're like worrying about the history of like were they simultaneous or not, and we can't determine that. Like the debate team will never be able to determine simultaneity. Like did one person jump on the back while the other person hit it, or all we can do is like look at what's in front of us, and what's in front of us is about chazaka, and not about the history of the thing. Like we don't have that ability. So okay,
Right,
but
right. The Ritva wants to say that the Hazaka trickle is connected to the original Kinyan. You can't disassociate those two things. You have a Hazaka on it because that act that we see in front of us, which creates the Hazaka, is also the act that created the Kinyan. And you can't just have a Hazaka out of the blue.
exactly, yeah. So
Right. I guess what I'm saying is like a step further than that, which is to say, it's not just that like this action of grabbing the reins or whatever was actually Kona the animal. Right. It's just that like it is the kind of action that would create a chazaka on an animal because it's the kind of thing that would allow you to be Kona the animal.
Well, that's
Right,
exactly
so
what Tosfos says.
Yeah.
That's exactly what Tosfos says. It's just that in isolation, he distinguishes between what makes Kinyan in isolation when you're the only one involved versus when there's two people trying to acquire it in the same way, at the same time.
Right. I guess what I'm saying is like the distinction that Tosfot is making seems to rely on a kind of firmer distinction between chazaka and kinyan that I think really makes sense, because the thing that makes the action an action that would create a chazaka is the fact that it could be kona.
yeah, it's I will leave that hanging though for the moment if that's
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's like what's
yeah.
resolved. I mean, the only question I have is like if you go back a daf to the sugya that Jessica and I taught, that seems like it wants to read the first half of the Mishnah as being about Kinyan.
The Hamagbian Metzia Chaviro Kana Chaviro. Yeah.
Yeah.
So good.
So that seems like I would want a reading of the Mishnah that keeps that like vaguely constant across both cases, no?
Yeah, well, except you can say, well, wait a second. At the end of the day, we said that may have only been about when the Tushnai Modim, right? Case.
Sure, right. So we can sort of throw that, but even then, like, I don't know, it seems like we should be able to read some.
And that's
about chazaka, except for the Shnai Modim. Like, I don't know. That seems
that's the case where both of them say, well, we actually agree, we both picked it up at the same time. And now you have a question of, well, wait a second. Now we know the history, but wait, how did both people picking up at the same time make a kinyan for either person? And so we have to have a method of how that kinyan works. Yeah. I think that's how you have to read that sugya in light of all of this. So, but if you remember, actually, that Tosfot about chazaka got into the whole thing, right? Ani agbatia v'chula sheli, and they're like, yeah, that case is about chazaka. It's not about kinyan. I think it's actually a very elegant. I kind of wish that Tosfot were on the previous Amud because it would have been helpful learning that sugya as well. So. Okay, but we have a problem, which the problem is that's gonna pop up is, if you remember, we said, well, Rabbi Meir can't be the author of our Mishnah because he said Yoshev is Kaneh. It doesn't need to say anything about Rochev, right? And the Tosfos is going to point out that, wait a second, now with the answer they just gave, maybe that's not so obvious. So Jacob, you are still up if that's okay.
Yeah.
Vito.
Vi Vim Tomar El Ki Parech Hasta Yosef Kani Rako Mibaye. This ne dikra masbalan dilo mubatel vaka Rako Driswe Va Azla Mahmate at Eskat Haman Ki.
Good.
So yeah, if you want to say that earlier when it asks,
Or I'd say challenges maybe is better.
when the Gemara challenges, now sitting acquires what we need Rechov.
Right? Do we need? In other words, Rabbi Meir already taught in Kilayim that Yoshev is koneh. Why does he doesn't need to teach Rechuv in our Mishnah? So
the
Lishna here teach it, right? Like he should.
Teach it. He should teach it. Since that we learn out that we don't that we don't mivatel the cheskat or the cheskat
Right.
Rechov that he's doesn't mivatel the manhig because the cheskat Rechov where he's holding it and it moves because of him doesn't mivatel the chazaka of the manhig.
Exactly. Rabbi Meir would have the same problem. He would need to teach this Mishnah too, because even though it's pshita to him that Yoshev is koneh and therefore Rochev is koneh, the Mishnah is not just coming to teach us that Rochev is koneh, it's coming to teach us that Rochev is no better than Mani when the two of them show up in terms of chazaka. And that sounds like
Tosfos is asking a kasha on himself because basically he created this problem that we're talking about hazaka, and so now he has to rephrase that, re-explain that kasha on that proof that the Mishnah can't be Rebbe Meir to work in the world of hazaka.
Yeah,
and he does that. He says, yeah.
So
you need in the world of hazaka, you need to show me that one hazaka wasn't going to move out to the other hazaka.
Exactly.
Yeah. So,
Very nice.
Okay, so what's the answer? Go for it.
V'yisomar de'ein tzarich le'shmeinu dipshita d'rachov l'chorei lo manhig b'raglav lo chashiv b'vatel chazkat hamanhig. De'i mishum d'tapis b'manhig nam mi'aza machmatei tefei merachov. Aval hasta d'mayri manhig b'raglav the cave into kol masish manhig yesh b'rachov the od tafis ba yivatel chaz kat hamanhig k'mas milan. The ulfi maido kimna hasta manhig b'raglav atya k'rabanan v'kol shekain k'Rabbi Meir.
Right. So he's going to explain. He's rereading the sugya a little bit here. So
yeah. So say that we don't need to teach it. Since it's obvious that Rechov by itself, without manhig b'raglav, isn't considered something that would mevatel the chazaka of manhig.
Yeah, I think chashiv here means like is so powerful enough or important enough, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
That makes yes. Okay. That if it's because he's holding it, he's leading it. Like if it's because he's holding it, leading it also makes it move more than Rechov.
Yeah. In other words, that's pshita, right? That in the case of that Rochev just by itself, mirror Rochev and not manhig Rochev that's manhig, that for sure doesn't batel the chazaka.
Right.
This is how the Rabbanan are seen. In other words, right, that there, this is where the kusha comes. Okay.
Mm-hmm. But
Um,
now that
yeah.
we're stating that it's manhig glove, since everything that there is by manhig, there's also there by Rechov, and further with Rechov that he's holding onto it, he should be mevatel the chazaka of the manhig. So it comes teach us, the Mishnah comes teach us that it doesn't mevatel.
Exactly. And now that we've made this okimta, right?
Yes. Right. We might know now that now that we made this manhig bar glove, that it's a case of manhig bar glove. We bring it, we make this okimta for like the Rabbanan, or for the Rabbanan, and also all the more so for Rabbi Meir.
Yeah. So I want to back up. I want to just do the whole thing. They're like, this is how the sugi gets read here, because it's kind of amazing. Right? They're like, we're like, well, can Rabbi Meir be the author of this Mishnah? And right now we're assuming Rahuv means just Rahuv, like almost like Yoshev. We're like, and they say, what's Pshita? Rabbi Meir says, look, Yoshev is Kane, right? I understand that. Rahuv, therefore, is Kane. But I don't need to teach even Rahuv, because Rahuv doesn't do enough to be Batel Manhig, right? But for the Rabbanan, when they come in, right, they're like, and then we're like, well, how can they must be the authors then? Because Rebbe Meir wouldn't need to teach us Mishnah, because he doesn't need to teach us the Rachuv is Koneh. And it's clear to him that Rachuv is not better than Manhig in the place of both, because Manhig does more things than Rachuv does. But now that we're like, well, then it must be the Rabbanan who authored the Mishnah. But the only way they can do it is that it's it's Rochevu Manhig Baraglav. Once you have to say that, then you go back to the original thing and say, actually, Rebbe Meir would also agree. Both Rabbanan and Rebbe Meir would agree with the Mishnah. And so it was Pshita when we were just assuming that it was Rochev ve'eno manhig. But now that we're assuming it's Rochev u'manhig, it's not Pshita. And Rebbe Meir actually agrees. And actually, so in the end, the Tosfot makes this Mishnah about Kule Alma writes this Mishnah, and not just the Rabbanan. In other words, Rebbe Meir and Rabbanan agree about this Mishnah. It's very elegant. Right. So in other words, Rebbe Meir and the Chachamim disagree about whether or not Rochev is Koneh when it's Rochev L'chudeh. But they both agree that Rochev Manhig is Koneh, and that our Mishnah is actually not about Kinyan, but about Chazaka. And therefore, they're both authors. And it actually works really nicely because our Mishnah is Stam. There's no opinions given in our Mishnah. So it actually works, even though often we'll say in the Gemara that the Mishnah that is written Stam is a certain author, often Rebbe Meir, in fact, right? Stam Mishnah Rebbe Meir, right? Here it works really nicely. So should I say it all again? Maybe someone else wants to summarize it. Say it all again. Okay, one more time, right? So while we were assuming that, I'll read it let me read it with the words, if that's okay with people, if that's, all right. It says V'yesh Lamar, right? So the kasha here is, well, how is it Pshita, this Mishnah Pshita to Rebbe Meir, because you might need to teach it in order to show that there's a distinction between assuming that the chazaka of Rachuv is no stronger than the chazaka of Manhig, right? And therefore the Mishnah would actually be necessary even in the Rebbe Meir's world. And so Tosfos says V'yesh Lomar the ein tzarich leshmiinu, right? To Pshita de Rachuv lechudei below Manhig baraglav lo chashiv levatel chazaka Manhig. It's obvious. What's Pshita? And it's not that it's Pshita to Rebbe Meir that Rachuv is Kane. What's Pshita to him is that even though he thinks Rachuv is Kane, it clearly is not better than Manhig in terms of Chazaka, right? Right? The imashum de tafispa, because if you said, well, maybe Rachuv has the advantage that it's holding on to the horse or the animal. Manhig nami azla mechamate tve mirachuv. For the case of Manhig, they're making the animal go a whole bunch more than Rachuv is, and therefore Manhig is clearly better. So Rebbe Meir would never have a question either. Aval hashted b'manhig baraglav. But now that we've switched it and said that when we say Rachuv, we mean Rachuv umanhig baraglav. The kevan de kol mashi yesh b'manhig yesh b'Rachuv. Now that the two are on equal footing, and in fact, ve'od de tafispa, and Rachuv actually has an advantage that now it's holding on also. Yevatel chazkat manhig. Then we'd say that you would that Rachuv would nullify or negate the Chazaka Manhig. Kamash Malan, therefore, comes to teach us that it doesn't do it. Ulafi Mai De Okimna Hashta, but Manhig Buraglav. Now that we're saying the Mishnah was actually Manhig Buraglav, Ate Kirabanan, Vikol Sheken Kirei Meir. It comes according to the opinion of Rabbanan, and all the more so according to Rabbi Meir. So both of them hold our Mishnah. And the original question that was Pshita, which we've changed, it was no longer a question that obviously Rochev is Koneh, but rather, obviously, even though Rochev is Koneh, it doesn't beat Manhig, now becomes actually, Rochev means something different, and everyone agrees about our Mishnah.
Yeah,
Very-
I suppose it's somewhat undercuts the argument of saying that it's Pshita that Rochev is, right, in one case, it's Rochev is strong enough to affect Kinyan. And the Tosfot are saying, no, it's obvious that Rochev is not strong enough to overpower another kind of chazaka. So it's maybe not the most like obvious if you can use the same
Exactly.
thing to prove two completely different directions.
It
But
is
it's-
interesting, right? Because we didn't say anything about the world of Rabbi Meir and how he would think about the Shmuel question, right? We kind of left that aside. So because Shmuel paskins like Rabbanan at the end of the day. So
Thank you for talking like over again, Joel. I found that helpful.
yeah, of course. This Tosfot took me several reads through, and I wrote some very copious notes on it. So, I think the one thing that's really powerful about this Tosfot is they get themselves into this world where the Mishnah has to be about Chazaka, and then they have to go and like answer how can you read every detail of the sugya per that reading, and it's hard. But they come up with like what I think is a very elegant answer as to how to do it. You know, there might be a little bit of creakiness, but it's like very elegant. So good. All right. It's already the hour. So maybe we will pause here. Are there any questions on that before we take a 5-minute break? Let's take a 5-minute break. And when we come back, we will talk about camels and donkeys and all sorts of good stuff.
Bears, oh my. Camels and donkeys.
Exactly.
Fine.
So lions and tigers.
Good to see you, Joel. Great job teaching again.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
I had one very funny moment today. We're planning an interfaith housing justice event,
Yeah.
and one of our partners came in and said, "We want to."
Let me pause the recording again. I want to start actually. I'm going to share my screen because we looked at this the first time, and I put some of this on your sheet, but I wanted to actually look at the beginning of the Tosefta before we get into this next sugya. There's the beginning of Tosefta and Bava Metzia. It's the Gemara is aware. I'm pretty sure the Gemara talks about a stam Tosefta is Rabbi Nehemiah, right? And there's times when the Gemara will like literally just take sections of the Tosefta. So it seems to know the Tosefta pretty well in general, right? This is not like a case where it's like some work that it doesn't know. It knows the Tosefta. But I wanted to look through this just to see, because our is going to our Tosefta is going to be in here. So maybe to start with Aleph. If someone want to read here, Tosefta Halacha Aleph.
I can
Yeah.
read.
Go for it, Sarah.
Alan, you can go ahead if you want. That was Alan, right?
And Joel, I was looking at your sheet. But okay. שניים אחוזים בטלי, זה נוטל עד מקום שתפוס, וזה נוטל עד מקום שתפוס. באמת דברים אמורים, בזמן שהיו שניהם תפוסים בה, אבל אם הייתה בידו של אחד מהם, המוציא מחבר עליו הראיה.
Exactly.
Right, so this came up, right? They're given the totalis, and they both take up until the point that they have hold of. Right, when this is true and they're both grasping it, but if one like really was, if one actually had it, then it's the Metzia Mechaver lever.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
Keep going a little bit. We can do yeah, so Shloshach Halakim Rabbi Shali might be the right.
yeah. האומר כולה שלי, ישבע שאין בה פחות מחמישה חלקים. אומר שלישה שלי, ישבע שאין לו בה פחות משטות.
Mhm.
כל של דבר, אין נשבע אלא חצי מה שטוען.
Okay.
Right, we said this in the Rambam as well, right?
Yeah.
Right, one says half, one
Don't worry
says
too much
third.
about. Yeah, don't worry too much about translating. One gets 5/6, one gets 1/6.
Okay.
We're good. Now go to ours.
Okay. שניים שיהיו משלים את הגמל מנהיגים בחמור, או שאחד מושך ואחד מנהיג. כמידה זאת, רבי יהודה אומר, כמידה הזאת.
Exactly.
רבי יהודה אומר, המושך את הגמל והמנהיג, המנהיג את החמור, הרי זה כזה. Okay. Two people are bringing along the camel, and they are both bringing, and they are riding on a chamor. They are directing it by on a chamor. What's?
Oh, I don't think it's on. I think Bob here just means the. He writes, why doesn't it say hachamor? It could be, maybe it's manhigal, but it just manhig goes with bet, and so. But I think it's the vav is an or, right? They're either pulling drawing the camel, or they're leading.
Right. Two separate cases. Right.
Driving's a better word. Driving the chamor, yeah. So.
Right. Or one's drawing and one's driving.
Mm-hmm.
Kamida hazot.
Yeah, what does that mean?
I guess it seems generally to mean that, the way in which this person is doing it somehow, just as so too, but it's not clear to me what is the mida that is.
Good. So first of all, I want to just flag that you paused on that. Like, it seems weird, right? Kimi dahazot. We're going to see our Gemara has an extra word there. But anybody just like, what does kimi dahazot mean, right? What's it referring to?
I think it's talking about
Rabbi
Yehuda's statement.
Oh, Rabbi Yehuda's statement coming up? You mean like the one we were just about to get?
I think so.
Interesting. I think it's referring back, actually.
Hmm.
Right, it's the mida that it's either Mashiach or manhig. Those are two midot.
No, I think. Go for it, Jacob. Yeah,
I think it's. I mean, based on some stuff we'll see later in the Gemara. I mean, there are lots of different ways to read it, as we'll see from other sources. But I think when we see the Ikadamri Hanhaga. Those are like kind of, it could be cases like with this way, like one of them will acquire, even if it might not be the normal way for that animal.
Mm-hmm.
And then one of these with the Ikadamri would be what they don't acquire, but they're, I don't know if I explained that well, but
I'm not sure. I mean, we're going to read it as Kimi dahazot and only Kimi dahazot at some point, right? Or at least try to read it that way.
Mm-hmm.
But I think there's maybe Aaron, go for it.
I mean, I know that this was jumping ahead to look at Rashi, but meaning that whatever one is appropriate to either a camel or a donkey.
Could be. Yeah, I think that's the kind of thing, right? The other version, I'm just like, this is not going to be the way the Gemara is going to read it, but another possibility is Kimi dahazot just means all that stuff we talked about, halacha aleph and halacha bet. It applies to these cases too. The same way that they divided there, we're going to divide here, right?
Very nice, very nice.
But also.
Wait, I want to say I didn't make that up. I got that from Tosefta Kishuta, so that's like not my.
Otherwise, the sentence doesn't make any sense because it's not actually saying it. It's like two people are riding and driving or what than Mani Kimida Hazot what? There's no claim.
Exactly. It has to be a din. We're expecting it.
Of the reality.
Yeah.
It has to be a din here. Structurally, there has to be a din here. And now you're saying the din is like we saw previously, you're saying.
Exactly. So.
Or the Tosefta Pshuta. Who wrote this? Is that Lieberman? No.
Lieberman.
Yeah, that's Lieberman. Yeah, that's Joel Lieberman. So But now, of course, when you add the word kanu, that's going to change things a little bit, but which is going to be the version that the Gemara has of this.
Interesting. It does show up in Tosefta Shabbat as well. I just posted the line in the chat.
So thank you. That's the Kamidah Hazot. Is that or Kamidah? Yeah. But good. I we'll look at it in a little bit, but or maybe later offline. So, but thanks for sharing that. All right, I will. You guys can look at it now. I have to focus. So, all right, good. So now that we're there, let's take a look at the Gemara itself and see what happens. So, let's see who hasn't read yet and wants to read.
I mean, I was just reading the Tosefta, but I think I could go on.
Sarah, are you readable? It's
I can read or either way, or if Alan wants.
we'll come back to you too, but we'll go.
Okay.
Go for it, Sarah.
Where were we?
We're at the second line from the bottom on Chet Amud Bet.
Yeah. Okay. Tashma. שניים שהיו מושכים בגמל ומנהיגים בחמור, או שהיה אחד מושך ואחד מנהיג, במידה זאת קנו. Okay, so there are two people, and one is, I don't know, pulling along the camel, and the other one is leading a donkey, or one was pulling. I think the idea there, or one was pulling and the other was leading. They acquire the thing through that action.
Exactly.
Is that good?
We'll finish the Breita, and then I have another question about it too. So, but
okay,
yeah.
Rabbi Yehuda Omer le'olam lo kana ad shet'eh meshicha b'gamal v'hanhaga b'chamur. Okay, so Rabbi Yehuda says no. You only acquire it if you do kind of the action that is appropriate to the animal. So if you pull along the camel and lead the donkey, then you acquire it. But presumably, if you do an action that is not that one, the one that's usually done for that kind of animal, and it doesn't work.
Yeah, someone told me, by the way, I don't know, but the donkeys, right? If you try to pull them, this is, I guess, where they get their reputation for being stubborn, right? They will not go at all. This is so people don't usually pull donkeys, but
what do they do with donkeys? They prod them from behind.
I think so. Yeah, I think that's the way you get them to go. So donkeys are stubborn, as is known. But good. I just in the way that we're reading this right now in the Gemara, what's the context of this Breita?
It seems like it has to be
Sorry, go for it. It
seems like it has to be a Metzia.
Does it?
Maybe. I don't know. It could.
It's clear.
Initially, that's what I thought, and then
Yeah, it's clear in the Tosefta that it's a Metzia, right? The Tosefta is talking about Metziot, right? But I don't know. Aaron, what did you have to say? You had a thought?
Oh, just that it's strange for this to come next, given that we've been talking about a totally different contrast between sitting or riding and pulling, and now we're talking about pulling and pushing.
Good.
Or pulling, whatever the other thing is.
Tosfot actually. Yeah, go for it, Rav.
Also, are we talking about, according to Tosfos, we were talking about Hazaka, and now also we're talking again about Kinyan.
Exactly. So, which might lead us to, and remember, we actually had this explanation about our Mishnah itself, that maybe this is about Mekach Memkar too, maybe only about Mekach Memkar, right? This is going to be the questions that are going to have to be teased out here of, is this only about Metzia? Is it not only about Metzia? And I'll say, right, we're going to use this as a way of trying to determine what the case is for Rachuv, but at the end of the day, it's also going to get us down the weeds of, well, can you acquire things kilo kadarka? And what if there's two people there and one is doing it in the normal manner, one is not doing it in the normal manner? Like, how does that play out as well, right? All these, so it's going to be its own halachic kind of method, own halachic discussion about gamal and chamor, or just animals in general, of like, are there normal manners and non-normal manners, and which one works and which one doesn't, and does one work in the place of the other when they both are happening? So
why does this seem to be a case of Metzia? Why does it seem likely? Like,
Are you asking me? Or
well, I'm asking Sarah, I guess, because Sarah
Yeah.
said it seems like that.
I guess just because I was trying to fit it into the rest of the sugya.
No, but why? I mean, yeah, and why? And what would be the problem saying it's? I mean, I think it is also Metzia, but what led you to that direction? I mean, why couldn't it
Because
be Kinyan?
why couldn't it be just straightforward Kenyan? I mean, the
Like
other
Kinyan,
reason
I
I
don't know,
think,
Kinyan from another person. I don't know. Yeah.
yeah, I guess the other reason I thought that is just like sort of textual literary, which is just like Shnayim shehayu moshchin begamal umanhigin bechamor doesn't sound like it's a Mishnah that's or a Breita that's telling you in general how a person buys a donkey. Because there
Right.
wouldn't be two
Right.
people.
There wouldn't be two people. Yeah, yeah, I guess so. Kind of. The
Right, so
seller
that was-
sold it to somebody.
so,
Yeah, that was my initial.
yeah. Although we understood the kulashali in our Mishnah to be that case, right? Of the two people like, throw money at the Mocher. He's not paying attention.
Right.
And
the money, right? Each of them gives them their money at the same time.
well, the money doesn't matter so much as right, because that doesn't make the kinyan anyway, right? It's like he accepts the money from both. One maybe Bal Korcho, doesn't remember who was whom, and they both do a kinyan action on the animal. Does it work or not? So
Yeah.
yeah, I think you're right, Sarah. Like usually that when two people are doing an action, it's because they're fighting over something they found, not fighting over something where there's a third party who sold it to them, right? That makes the whole thing a little more difficult in reality.
Yeah, it just seems like a kind of dachuk reading, and like again, just a sort of like literary parallelism would make you think, oh, this is about a Metzia.
Yeah.
And there are two, and it's contested because there are two people who have a claim on the thing.
So
that's what's going on.
Yeah, the reason I bring it up is because it will later become an issue in terms of, I think, the reading of this among the Rishonim of are the rules about this Gamal and Chamor, are they the same for Mekach Memkar as Metzia, or are they different? Do they have different standards in that sense? So
yeah, for sure.
Just to actually, and then we'll dive into the Gemara beyond the Breita, right? We just did it, I think, right? Someone remember a case where Mekach Memkar something worked and not in the case of Metzia? We literally just did it. It was like last week, I think, right?
Nasira.
Exactly. The reins, right? If Jacob hands me the reins of a horse, I have it in an acquisition, right? Not just he hands me them to say, watch this for me, but I have acquired it. But if there's a horse hanging out, in no person's land, and it's, clearly a Metzia that I can, acquire, it's clearly hefker, then my taking the reins doesn't do anything. So okay. That's all a little bit of a side thing that will come back later, probably not today based on the time, but we'll see. So now we've got a Katani Mihat. Who is Sarah, you're reading. Keep going a little bit.
Okay, Katani Mihat. Oshaya Achad Moshech Vahad Manhig. Moshech Umanhig in. Aval Rochev Lo. Okay, so we have this other Breita. One was
not the other Katani Mihat, right? Is like
or
however in the list of
in the Breita it says, yeah.
Yeah.
It says if one was pulling it along and the other one was leading it, meaning that one who was pulling or I guess driving from behind or whatever, we're going to translate that, and leading, that creates a kinyan, but merely riding the animal doesn't.
In other words, it's a complete list, right?
Our
Breita.
Right. Our Breita gives a complete list. Therefore, right, Kamash Malan, that the Rachuv is not among them.
Yeah, as opposed to like people have seen the term, right? Tana v'shaire, right? They taught it but left stuff out, right? This is saying no, this is complete. This is a complete list. So, okay, what's the answer?
Hu adin de afilu Rachuv? V'hadekatane Moshech umanhig la'afuke mid Rabbi Yehuda Damar ad hashtav mashicha begamal v'hanhaga bechamor. Kamash Malan.
4 more.
Afilu ifkanami. Kane.
Good.
Okay, so so okay, so it we might think that this is a complete list and then Rachuv is excluded, but we're gonna now reject that and say no. Actually, this works the opposite way, and it's teaching you that the same thing can be applied to Rachuv. So Rachuv also works. Because the Breita mentions Moshe Umanhig in order to go against the position of Rabbi Yehuda, who says up to the point that one would be pulling a camel or leading a donkey.
Mm-hmm.
Which means to teach us that even the opposite action would work. So
Exactly.
even the action that's not normal for that, not the way you normally lead a donkey or a camel, still is con.
Yeah, there's Rabbi Yehuda says, right, until you've gotten to the point of doing Mashiach on the Gamal or Hanaga B'Chamor, you haven't acquired it. And the Reisha is there to teach us that the Tanakama says, no, right? It doesn't matter which action you do. It's just you got to do one of them. And if you do both of them, then you're, I guess Yachloku or something like that.
And why did it leave out Rachuv?
Because Rabbi Yehuda doesn't think that works in either case, theoretically, potentially for these animals. So, or he thinks or the opposite,
or the opposite.
Yeah,
there's no machloket there. There's no machloket there. Maybe that they whatever it is, there's no machloket there. They both think it works, or they both think it doesn't work. Right?
Exactly. So, but and so this is just showing the distinction.
Right. I think because you can ride both a donkey and a camel.
Yeah, actually,
there's no obvious difference between the two things.
Yeah, and
that's what I thought. At least I don't know.
That's a normal form of getting them to move is riding it. So yeah.
Right, like in both cases, it's normal to ride the camel, but it's not normal to prod the camel from behind, and it's not normal to.
Yeah. So in fact, I saw
because it doesn't work.
It was either something I gave you or the Tosfot Rosh. I can't remember which it was, but right now, where he talks about that.
So Mida is basically some kind of synonym for derech here. So the conversion you get,
exactly. In this manner, you're kanu. In other words, in either of these manners, you're kanu, you're koneh. And Rabbi says, no. You got to do right mishicha for gamal and hanaga b'chamor, or hanaga b'chamor, and not you can't switch it. But we're gonna have a major problem with this because that makes the Mishnah verbose, and that's problematic. You can't have or the Breita verbose, sorry, but you can't have a verbose Breita. So maybe Alan, you want to take over?
Yes. Okay. Right. So the first of Rabbi Yehuda, Kamash Malan de Pilo Ifchana Mekani. Ihachi le'arbinhu v'litnaihu shnaim sheyu moshchin manhigin ben megamal ben chamor ben bechamor.
Good.
So if the reason why the Gemara taught Moshe Umanhi was to exclude Rabbi Yehuda's opinion, Rabbi Yehuda thinks it's either Mashiach for a Gamal or Manhi for a donkey. Well, why don't we bring the two together and teach the two of them? And quote, two people who were simultaneously, who were mostly manhiging either a gamal or a chabad. So they were doing both things for either one of the animals.
Exactly. In other words, there's two actions and two animals, and if two people are doing either of the actions and either of the animals, it all works out, right? It's you just have it's like a game. You just choose them, but all of them are fine at the end of the day. So, and it's a much shorter way to teach it. But instead, we have this weird thing, right, where it starts out Shnaim hayu moshchim b'gamal umanhigi b'chamor, sounding like there's maybe some preference to those things, or echad moshech ve'echad manhig, and then we have or one and the other. So, so we're gonna have to answer why didn't it teach it this way? So, all right, so what's the answer?
Okay, okay, so of those four combinations, there's actually one that does not work. And it's ikadame meshicha bechamor, ikadame hanhaga bekamal. Okay,
Exactly.
so we're not sure exactly what in that grid, which of the boxes is grayed out, but one of them is.
So, and good. And when it says one of them doesn't work, is that when one person is doing that one action, or is it when both people, there's two people, and one's doing one action, one's doing the other?
Rashi seems to think it's both people are doing. Each person is doing one action, right? This is
But read the Rashi, Ika Chad Sad de Lokane, and the next one.
Ika Chad Sad de Lokane, Lahachilo Matse the Matne, the Turbayim, Meshicha and Haga. ותנהכי נושכים בגמל ומנהיגים בחמור. או שהיה אחד מושך ואחד מנהיג ואחד מהן אותו שדרכו בשני. Okay, so Rashi says, for this, that we can actually teach both of the things together, i.e. Mashiach and Naga. And so it teaches, that's why it says, Mashchin for Camel and Manhigim for Daki. Either, right, or one was doing Mashiach, one person was doing Mashiach, and one person was doing Naga. For one of the animals.
Yes.
Yes.
And which animal is it? Well, Rashi, he gives you a little bit of a hint. Right.
Right. It is. I'm sorry, I'm getting a little bit crossed up in my head there.
Yeah, it's okay.
We are pulling along the camel.
Yes.
We are guiding on the donkey.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So that's one scenario one. Scenario two is one was carrying the same, there's only one animal. One was pulling and the other one was guiding.
Mm-hmm. But for the animal ship, right?
So if it is if it was a camel, then the person who was pulling it along is the one who was kind of, if it is a donkey, the one who is guiding it is kind of, is that
well, no. I think one of the two animals, if one is Moshech and one is Manhig, it works. And that's the animal Oto Shadar Kobishnehem. There's one of those two animals, it works. Either of those things is normal for both of them. And therefore, even though maybe one's preferential, that that if the two people are doing the two different actions, they split it. But for the other one, that's not the Otosha Darko, right, Bishnehem, that one, if one's doing one action, one's doing the other, one of the actions gets preferred, and that person gets the animal. So, like, I'll give you an example. I'm going to paskin here for a second. I'm not really going to paskin, but I'm going to pretend to paskin. Let's pretend for a second that it's normal to both pull and to drive a camel, but it's only normal to drive a donkey, right? So Rashi seems to be saying, if
no, wait, let me correct you. The derech is still one, but the wrong derech works. That's the way Rashi said it.
Okay, yes. So
the derech is with a camel is by pulling, and the derech with the donkey is by hitting, no questions asked.
Mm-hmm.
But nevertheless, well, now you have to fill it.
Well, hold on. Maybe I have. There's two ways to read Rashi, but we'll go with it. All right. So let's say that we'll take case one. It's normal to drive a donkey, and it's normal to pull a camel. Okay. And let's just say for the moment, though, that for a donkey, therefore, if one person is pulling it and one person is driving it, the driver gets the donkey, because normally you drive a donkey. Okay. But for a camel, if one person's pulling it, one person's driving it, they split it. Now, it seems from the Rashi, it's because he says, right, that it's darkod b'shnehem, that it is the way to do both things for that animal, right? That those are the key words in that Rashi, I think, that really kind of play this out. Because there's one of those animals where, yeah, maybe you do one action's more usual, but you see both, and one of them you never see the other, right? I think I may have lost people a little bit here.
Okay, maybe you're right. Okay, I take it back. You're right. Oto behema. You have to read it like that.
Exactly.
It bothered me when I was reading this why he's in masculine, but it should be ota behema.
Yeah.
Shedarka
Mhm.
bishnehem. There's one animal that its way of acquisition is in both mechanisms.
Yeah.
And we don't know which animal that is.
It's a good point because Chazal usually, in terms of grammar, usually use the feminine for animals. So even masculine animals, even male animals get feminine grammar. So, but yeah, and then you have to ask, well, wait a second, Rashi. Now, if you think a chamor is only driven, do you think that pulling a chamor with nobody else opposing you? What do you think about that case? And it's not so clear what Rashi thinks about that case either. So there's a lot of halachic questions in the air at this point, right? One of these animals, both work for it, even when two people are doing, the two opposite actions. One of them, it definitely doesn't work for both people if the two are fighting each other. But it's a question also, does it work if only one of them is doing the unusual action? And we're gonna have to answer all these questions. It's kind of a deep question about kinyan. Does kinyan work in an unusual manner, even if it's like usual for other animals, but not for that animal?
In other words, when there's an opposition, then maybe it doesn't work. Using the wrong method maybe doesn't work when there's somebody else doing a better way. But when there's nobody doing a better way, then maybe anything works. Any type of act that would normally be for some other kind of animal would really be the way of driving it, but would also work here as long as it's in the category of potentially acquiring act. Then even the wrong one might work, right?
Exactly. So, but by the way, just as a side note to all this, what kind of animal was our Mishnah?
It was a behemoth.
It was behema. It was as generic as you can get, pretty much. I mean, I don't think you can be rochev on a daka, right? So, and behema sometimes covers a behema daka, right? Anyway, so you can't ride a chicken,
or a goat,
yeah. It's
or an ostrich once.
What was that, Alan?
I once did ride an ostrich, but it's another story. It's a story for another time.
That's okay. So in that case, there's one more Rashi. Read the b'midazot. So what is b'midazot?
Yeah, because I think that's for the next chunk, right?
Oh, is it? It is. You're right. So it is the next one. Yes, I'm getting ahead of myself. So okay, now we've got the Ika de motive coming next. So that's version 1. Version 2 is going to be similar, just a different part of the Breita. But this should be. I don't know what you have in your Gemara. It should be Ika de motive and not eat. It's very subtle, right? Eat goes with a pronoun after it usually, and Ika doesn't. That's the difference between the two of them. So
Tionim has that correction.
yeah, mine does as well. In my there's different Oz Vadars out there. That's the reason I say that. So I don't know what each of them has. So okay, Alan, keep going.
Okay, the Ika motive Seifa. Okay, so it's possible to raise a kind of a similar line of objection from Seifa. B'mida zoka. Right. They acquire through this mida. The mida zo limutemai. What is mida zo going to exclude? La limute rechuv, la limute ifa. You might think it's to exclude someone who's sitting on it. No, it is to exclude the opposite, meaning someone who does hanhaga for a gamal or meshicha for a chamor is low kana.
Exactly.
Okay, so you got it. You have to you do the acquisition and the characteristic manner mida for the animal in order to kind of
In the appropriate not for that animal, exactly as you put it. I like that. It's good.
yeah,
So,
like, yeah. Yeah, Rabbi Yehuda. Okay, so that should be Rabbi Yehuda's position. B'midah should just imply what was offered for Rabbi Yehuda as an alternative opinion.
where's the machloket, right? You know,
Yeah.
so
Okay, Ika benign here, tzad echad v'lo there actually is one difference where you wouldn't for the sum for the Tanakhama as opposed to Rabbi Yehuda you would not cut out.
I would say there's only one, right? That's not gonna
Right.
for the Tanakh, as opposed to Rabbi Huda, who thinks that, you know, for both animals, there's one that's not gonna.
Right, and it could either be Mashiach for Bechumar or which is exactly where we wound up. There's a couple lines up.
Good. And with our question unanswered. And so no, Rachuv, this Breita says nothing about Rachuv at the end of the day, we've decided, but it does leave us with lots of questions about methods of kinyan with animals. And that will be an interesting halachic pursuit. I'm trying to think in terms of time. How do I want to do this? Let's do the Tosfot. I want to do Moshe Manhig. We're really here to do Tosfot at the end of the day. So let's do Tosfot. That's I think the goal of this class, right? Rav Nachum is
Well, the way I've been teaching it, that's the goal, yes. But
I
you're
like
entitled to teach it a different way.
well, you know, Gefet learning, right? Gemara, Perush, Rashi, Tosfot is like it's like a standard. That's how.
Yes, I think that Tosfot is really the hardest Rishon, and
Mhm.
therefore, if you can read Tosfot well, then you're set. So yeah, it's good.
That fits the Ashrut idea, right? That we if you can learn, you know, Isser Beheter, then you can learn anything. So
Yeah, it's like what JFK said. We do these things not because they are easy, but because they are hard.
exactly. So, and this is hard, so it's good. So let's do the Tosfot. Moshechu manhig in aval rachuv lo. But okay. But and Tosfot's gonna, and people may have themselves. I mean, I even made it kind of mentioned it, right? Bristled at this is like, how do you know from this Breita that it's a comprehensive list? It was kind of an interesting conclusion. Who wants to? Who is anyone not read today? Who wants to read? Do we have someone feeling very Tosfot? Michael, can we come back to you? Is that
Sure.
go for it? All right. First Tosfot on Ted Amud Aleph Moshechu manhig in aval rachuv lo.
Okay. Right. So this is back kind of like extrapolating. We're trying to extrapolate from the Breita.
Exactly.
Tema Minalan Dilma Kol Shekain Rachuv Detafis Ba.
Yeah.
Right, like you could basically say the opposite, that where the Breita says that you can acquire by pulling or by driving, but not by riding atop the animal. It's totally unclear where they make that inference from, because you could say that all the more so since they are actually grabbing onto the animal.
Mm-hmm.
They have a stronger claim than the other two types of or the other two actions that would give you a claim to possession.
Exactly. You might even say that for Gamal Chamor, well, Pshita that Rachuv is Koneh, right? Because you're Tofes. And you need to come and teach Manhig and Moshech because they're less Pshita. So
right.
Or maybe even for another reason. So okay, good.
Ve'imishum deshaira atu bechol duchte tana kulhu kinyanin. And if you would say that it's because the Breita, or not the Breita, right? That the Gemara is
The Breita.
Yeah. It is Breita. Okay. The Breita is omitting like does that mean that the Tana is supposed to like that it would teach all of the various forms of acquisition in every single place that it is?
Exactly. Like, what do you expect for the Tana here? Like, they got to teach every kinyan every place. Otherwise, you're
Yeah.
going to assume that kinyan doesn't work. That's a little
Right.
ridiculous.
I want to point out something to correct something that I said, or not correct, to correct a implication that I made.
Mhm.
Now, they were saying what Tosa is saying is not every Braita or every Mishnah all over Shas when it talks about kinyanim is going to mention all the types of kinyanim, and so we shouldn't expect any more from the author of this Braita. Now, where is a great example of that? Well, we mentioned it when it talks about the kinyan Mashicha. Talks about whistling to it and hitting it, and it doesn't mention pulling it.
Yep.
Well, so Tosfos is saying, of course, pulling it is obviously included in pulling as a category of Mashicha. It's Mashicha itself. So the list was obviously inconclusive. So lists don't have to be fully inclusive.
Mm-hmm. And the Gemara itself will say this sometimes, right? There are several sugyot where the Gemara will say, as I said, Tana v'shayrei. And sometimes the Tana teaches and leaves stuff out. Like, you can't expect everything to have every list. Okay, but they're going to get it from a different place that Rachuv is excluded. So keep going, Michael.
V'yesh lomar de Mishnah Yetera kadayek de le'arvinhu v'letninhu shnayim shayu moshchin o manhigim ben bagamal ben bachamor v'tulo.
Mm-hmm.
So we could say that it is being precise and pulling this from the extraneous language of the Mishnah,
Mm-hmm.
because it could have combined the clauses and taught it as a case of two who were pulling or driving either a camel or a donkey, and that's it.
Exactly.
Midikatane bilishana yetera shma mina dilemaute rachuv ata. V'hainu deparich batar hachi vili arvinu vilitninhu. Right. So from the fact that it teaches, right, from the fact that the Braita teaches it with this extra language, we can learn from that it is meaning to exclude the case of Rachuv, which is why we have the objection after this of saying, well, we could have combined it and taught it more succinctly.
Exactly. After we say it isn't excluding Rachuv, right? After the Gemara says, well, no, Rachuv isn't excluded. This is right. But this is just to distinguish from the position of Rabbi Yehuda. And the Gemara comes back and says, well, then write the Mishnah better, the Braita better, right? And the response could have been, oh, you're right. There's the unwritten response is, oh, maybe that is to exclude Rachuv. Maybe that is why there's Mishnah Yetera. No, there's Mishnah Yetera, right? But because there's Chad Sad de Lokane, right? And that's actually it's a very I love sometimes the way Tosfot read Gemara, and I think it's a really elegant reading of the sugya, even if it's not the pshat reading of it. So should I say that again? Is how Tosfot did that?
Yeah.
So Tosfot, right, the first part we got right, their objection was right. Well, just because something's left off the list, that doesn't mean that it's not included. And they say, no, because this Braita is taught in such a way that seems extraneous, right? That it has, right, Shnayim she'emushchim, begamal, manhigim bechamor, or she'echad moshech bechad manhig. It's like some of the extra words there. That's proof that the Mishnah is trying to flag that it's only these two ways and nothing else, right? The fact that the Mishnah, the Braita was written weirdly should tip us off that it's trying to exclude something. And that's why the Gemara, when after it says, no, this doesn't exclude Rachuv, is like, well, if it didn't want to exclude Rachuv, then it should have been written better. And it says, no, the reason it wasn't written well was for a different reason. It's because there's one type of kinyan that doesn't work for one of these two animals, right? And not to exclude Rachuv. But it makes the whole thing make sense as to why was the Gemara even thinking that Rachuv would be excluded in the first place. So it's because something weird about the language of the Braita tipped it off, and not just because it only lists Manhig and Moshech. One more time, or
Another
we-
way of another way of saying it is to say, since the Breita was wordy, couldn't it have been a little bit more wordy and thrown in what the din of Rechuv is?
Yeah,
You see that it didn't seem to mind saying some extra letters, so put in some more letters.
I like that even better. I like that it's like, once you're gonna start including all sorts of extra words in there, might as well include everything. At that point, you should be a comprehensive list. Okay, good. Where we are, but now we're gonna have a possible objection to this. So,
ואם תאמר לעולם מנהלן למעוטי רחוב, דילמה דלא ערבינו כדי להשמועינן דמשיחה אורחה בגמל והנהגה בחמור. ואפילו הכי אחד מושך ואחד מנהיג בגמל, לא מבטל משיכה דאורחה בגמל את ההנהגה דלאו אורחה. וכן בחמור איפכה. Right, so let's say, like you could say that actually, why would I say that this is to exclude Rachuv? Maybe it's not mixed up together, right? Like maybe it's taught in this extended form in order to teach us that Mashicha is the normal way of acquisition, or the normal way of not acquisition, right? Like the normal way that we act when we are you know, like when it's our animal, we're trying to move it from one place to another, that the normal way to do things is pulling a gamal or driving a donkey. And even though that's the case, one who does either action, either the moshech or the manhig for a camel, isn't going to, right, that the one who is pulling, which is the normal way to move a camel, does not cancel out the claim of the one who is driving it, which is not the normal way of doing it.
Beautiful.
But
And so too, right, the opposite way with the donkey, that it's normal to kind of move it from behind, but that one who is moving it from in front, you know, is still understood to have just as valid a claim.
Exactly. Right.
But if that is what the Tanna Kama is really teaching, then how could the Gemara then come along and say, well, there is some ambiguity over which derech or mida is associated with which animal?
Oh,
because that
good. So here's what I think it is, right? And maybe someone else has an answer, but I haven't. If not, I have an answer to this question. And let me say, Alan's question is, right? Imagine if the Gemara, if the Breita was taught the way the Gemara says, Shnaim shayu moshlim manhigim ben megamal ben mechamor, right? Right? B'midazot kanu, right? That just like that. And so it's like there's two actions, there's two animals, and you can just put lines between them, and any of that stuff works, right? That's and I think what someone might say is, well, if it just said Shnaim shayu moshlim umanhigim ben megamal ben mechamor, oh, moshlim is the first, gamal is the first, those two match up, right? And then manhigim is second, chamor is second, those two match up, and you can't cross them, right? It's only in the case where A B goes to A B and not A, and you can't go across, so something like that.
well, Rashi certainly doesn't read it that way, right? He's very bought into the idea that there's a specific derech that goes along with each animal. So they would then have to say that Rashi is not properly understanding the Mishnah, right?
Well, I think Tosfot's saying that you could have understood the Breita that way if we had written it that way, right? This is a possible misread that you would have had, and that's why it's gonna. We didn't. Michael didn't read the next piece of it. He's like, that's why it's gotta give this weird line afterwards that doesn't make so much sense to us.
That's right. I lost track of this. I'll have a minute.
I was gonna say that
Yeah.
again, right? The way that the Gemara wants to teach the Breita says, just say Moshech. Do I have the order right? I gotta make sure. Yeah, Moshech, Manhig, Gamal, Chamor, right? And then you could just draw the lines right between them, however you want. It doesn't matter. But when we do that, what you might do is say, oh, Moshech is first and Gamal is first, right? Manhig is second, Chamor is second. So those two match up, right? So maybe Moshech only works for Gamal, Manhig only works for Chamor, and not vice versa. That would be the mistake you would make. And that's why Tosfos says you could have claimed that that was the reason for the weird writing in the Breita, and not because of an exclusion of Rachuv, right? This is where the Tosfos kind of pushing on this whole thing. So, am I making sense of this Tosfot for people? Is this somewhat? Michael, do me a favor. Just read the Ulachach Tana.
Ulachach Tana batarhaki echad moshech ve'echad manhig v'lo lema'ote rachuv. Right, and therefore it teaches after this, right, that whether it's in the case of one who pulled or one who drove, and that does not exclude the case of one who is rochep. Exactly.
So Tosfot, in summary of that whole thing, it says maybe the weird writing was to teach us that it works either way, even if you do it in the normal derech and not the normal derech, and has nothing to do with rachuv, right? And so still, again, our question pops up: why does the Gemara Adam Melchi think rachuv is excluded? So maybe I've got 3 minutes here, so maybe I'll take the Yesh Lamar if that's okay. And we may have to come back to it. Rav Nachum offered me a second week, so maybe I'll take a second week. We can do the halachic stuff, and we'll come back to this, but will this be a first look? It says V'yesh Lamar. Kivan sheyashmi'enu shemishicha v'hanaga shnehem kanu begamal v'chamor, pshita she'ein echad mevatel chavero, mishum hai orche v'hai lav. Right, is that once it teaches us that mishicha and hagagal and that both pulling and driving, both of them are work for both the gamal and the chamor, it's obvious at that point that neither of them could be mavatel chavero, just because one is the normal manner, one is not the normal manner, right? In other words, you never would have read it that way at the end of the day, is really what Tosfot's saying. That's not a good read. Had the Breita been written in that manner. But maybe in our Mishnah, you might say, wait a second, why does our Mishnah then have to teach us both, right? In other words, if it's obvious to you that if both things work individually as a kinyan, that they should, therefore one shouldn't be mevatel the other one in the place, then why do we need a Mishnah about rachuv and manhig? And it says, b'manitin mashmi'inu shapir, she'ein mevatel rachuv u'manhig b'raglav et manhig l'chudei, lefi sheyesh b'rachuv kol ma sheyesh b'manhig ve'od etafispa. It says, because unlike mishicha versus manhig, where the two of them are on equal footing, just one is more common than the other maybe, but rachuv and manhig b'raglav actually has something above just normal manhig, and therefore the Mishnah has to come and teach us that one kinyan works in the place of the other. All right.
The Tosfos is, just to say one thing. Tosfos is telling us an answer to a question which we had or discussed, which is that when we're saying that manhig works for a camel, sorry, a moshech works for a camel, and hitting works for a donkey, or it doesn't work, we're not talking about that in isolation. In other words, in isolation also, in other words, the question was also in isolation. Because if it works in isolation, then it also works, then neither one will mavatel the other. So when Rav Yehuda says you have to do the right form of kinyan, he means essentially, he means there are different types of kinyan for different animals, and it's not just a question of when there's an opposer, but even when there's no opposer, and I'm all by myself, I have to do Mashicha by a camel.
Exactly. Yeah.
Maybe that's the halachic aspect.
It is, and what I'll say for next week, we'll go back over the end of this Tosfot, because I think I rushed it a little bit. I want to also look at, there's a Tosfot Harosh that I think makes this more clear. It's always good to look at their Tosfots, right? And then we'll get into the halachic material, the Meiri, the Rambam, the Ravid, the Magi Mishnah. There's a Kesef Mishnah. I think I may have I think I gave, and then we'll look at the Tur Shulchan Aruch, Beit Yosef world. And if that's okay for Rav Nachum, if I do all that for next week. So, but
yeah, I think so. Yeah. Sounds good. Sounds excellent.
good. And everybody,
Dara and the Rishonim that we have.
yeah, exactly. I'm going to add a Tosfot to Rosh that's in the back of your Gemara. But I think that I may not add beyond that. I'll let you know by tomorrow for sure.
Great. Take care, everyone.
Yashar Koach, everybody. Have
Great
fun.
question.
Pesach.
Yashar Koach, Joel, thank you.
Thank you.
Yishakar, Joel.
So, I have to go pick my kids up, but Rav Nachum left, so I will.